Well, I think since participants don't move upwards anymore, we have 12 so far, I think it would be a good opportunity to open the session. So welcome everybody and thank you for choosing this session. As I said, my name is Stefan Bösner from the Stockholm Environment Institute. I'm supported in this session by Dr. Sasha Stark, who will be moderating the session, and by my colleague Dr. Sandra Wenghaus, who will also support us with as a rapporteur. Just to give a brief overview first of the housekeeping rules, I kindly ask the people who don't speak to switch off your microphones and your cameras, but you have all done that, so very good. And if you have some questions to our panelists, please put them into the box in the chat, and then our moderator will read them out for discussion to the panelists. We have 5 highly interesting panelists, and a warm welcome and thank you to them for being here with us today. We'll start off the session with Dr. Franz Hermans, who is a research associate in the Department of Structural Development of Farms and Rural Areas at the Leibniz Institute of Agricultural Development in Transition Economies. That's a good title, with an expertise in innovation and sustainability transitions, but also in agricultural innovation systems. Then we will move on to Dr. Stine Håkansson, who is a professor at the Copenhagen Business School, where one of her main research fields is the geography of innovation, but she also has an expertise on China. So maybe she will enlighten us on that. Then we have Dr. Christian Klar from the Forschungszentrum Jülich, who is the head of the coordination office in the bioeconomy revier, and holds a doctorate from the Cologne University. We will then let Stefanie Bröhring, a full-time professor of technology, innovation management, and entrepreneurship at the agricultural faculty of the University of Bonn, who also hails from the BREAKOUT, from the consultancy in private sector. So she might give us a perspective about how the private sector can facilitate innovation. And then we have Elspeth McRae, who is the chief, Dr. Elspeth McRae, I'm sorry, the Chief Innovation and Science Officer at SION, a leading forest institute in New Zealand with a strong background in bioeconomy, biorefinery, and bioplastics. These are our speakers. And if you maybe just go back from the slide, one slide back, that would be lovely. Exactly, and here you can see the guiding questions, which we asked our participants to reflect on, and each participant will here now have 2 minutes of an impulse talk to give his or her opinion about these guiding questions. And then hopefully we have fruitful discussions, and then I will yield the floor to my colleague Sasha Stark. But I would suggest that we get started. So I kindly ask Dr. Franz Hermans to unmute his microphone and turn off on his camera and give us his perspective about transnational innovation systems. Thank you very much. We can't hear you for the time being. Or I can't.
Is this better?
Yeah, no, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, then I'll do it like this. Like I was saying, I basically give the same speech as I gave on Monday. That session was a bit marked by technical difficulties. This one appears to go a lot better. So in that sense, we get a nice do-over. So I was thinking about these 3 questions, and I think if you want to promote this development of transnational innovation systems in the bioeconomy, it might be good to take a step back first and look at the drivers of globalization first. And what we know from innovation and technology studies is that when it comes to development of new technologies, and as they become more and more popular over time, the production processes become more and more standardized, and as a result, competition becomes more and more cost-driven. And a good example of this, not from the bioeconomy, but from other sustainable technology, is the development of solar panels. In the early phases, a lot of European and German companies were also involved in their development and production. But as the solar technology became more and more standardized, production technology moved to China. And maybe the quality of these solar panels wasn't as good as the European ones, but since they were able to produce in such large volumes, these solar panels were very cheap, and they were able to outcompete a lot of European firms. This process isn't unique for sustainable technologies, and in fact has been observed in all kinds of industries. The textile industry is a classic example. It's one of the first industrial sectors that moved to East Asia to profit from low labor wages. But at the same time, this is a sector that also offers some interesting examples of regions that were able to withstand these forces of globalization, and that were able to transform their industry and and use some of the chances of this internationalization as well. And the most famous examples are probably found in Italy, with the fashion districts there, which have been remarkably successful in managing their international value chains. Design and marketing is done from Italy, and a lot of the production and manufacturing is actually being outsourced. So a lot of research has been done on what makes these Italian clusters so successful. And I think these factors can be summarized in 3 elements that are also important for transnational collaboration in the bioeconomy. And the first is that you need to analyze your sectoral innovation system where you are competing. In the bioeconomy, we have this concept of the value pyramid of biomass. It starts at the bottom, competing for instance, on biofuels. And in the top are these life science technologies related on health, where the competition is more on knowledge and innovation. And the Italian examples have been very successful in moving up to a higher segment with a higher added value. And the second element is the characteristics of your regional innovation system, and what are the unique qualities in terms of labor market, natural resources, industrial sectors that might help you to diversify your regional production, but also, for instance, work on regional branding. Again, made in Italy is, of course, something that is very still important when it comes to fashion. And finally, it's the type of knowledge that you are competing with. Do you operate with a lot of formalized knowledge, such as patents, as is done in these life science sectors, or are you working with this type of tested knowledge? And this is the type of knowledge like designing that you cannot learn from a book, but that can only be transferred by learning by doing. So I only have 2 minutes, and I think I passed that already. So I'll stop by saying that I think successful transnational cooperation starts with knowing the strengths and weaknesses of your own region first. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Franz, for your very interesting presentation. A little bit over time, but I think we can manage. I will now yield the floor to Dr. Håkansson. Stine, please share your knowledge with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and welcome everybody. It's nice to meet you. My research field is in what I call a new geography of innovation, and it's, as Franz also just said, we now see new, well, not so new anymore, but global forms of organizing innovation at the industrial level and also at the firm level. And we've been doing this project on global innovation networks that has been looking into the industry level and the company level of organizing innovation globally. And that can be organized by internally or externally. And internally, we see different forms of organizations. We see firms developing these centers of excellence that are either geographically bound, so that they have their, for instance, biofuel hub in the US or in China, and then they have their detergent hub maybe in Denmark or in South Africa. So you have these geographical specialized fields, But we also see, and I think that is actually more interesting, distributed networks that are more or less organized in virtual ways. And in the sense of the contribution to the world, I see these virtual or distributed networks having a more of an impact for the catch-up of new economies and also for spillover effects in adapting innovations to local conditions. Some of the drivers behind this are, of course, evolutionary drivers. It's just a normal development, but we also see a lot of these networks being formed due to market or technological reasons. And at the moment, the green transition is definitely a main driver of these innovation networks, also the digitalization, and they are together also facilitating new forms of networks. Another interesting finding, I think, is this, that the gravity is moving beyond the advanced economies. That in a way you can see that the industries of Europe, where I'm based, and the US, are kind of stuck in an incumbent trap by having built expertise in a regime that will probably soon be over. And you see some of these emerging markets actors can jump into a new regime or new development much faster. And I think we shouldn't undermine the importance of engaging with these economies in innovation networks in order to accelerate the change that is needed.
Well, thank you very much, Stine, for this very interesting presentation, also about the virtual distributed networks. Fascinating, was not aware. I immediately hand over to Dr. Clark. Christian, please.
Yeah, hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I would like to focus on regionalization aspects of transnational innovation systems. And I believe that a prerequisite to make full use of transnational innovation systems are well-defined bioeconomy regions. And I think it's common sense that bioeconomy implementation will be realized at a regional scale, but too often at the moment, the bioeconomy regions end or stop at borders. So a special design of bioeconomy, which will differ from region to region, will be defined or should be defined not by borders, but by the suitability of natural conditions of climate, land use systems, socio-economic structures, which will form a homogeneous and bioeconomy region. And it should not be hampered by artificial borders. So if we have such a well-defined bioeconomy region, then it is also very important to define a framework which promotes or which provides a stable and predictable regulatory framework to promote private commitments and investments transnationally. And if this is in place, it should be accompanied by a transnational central coordination of this bioeconomy region, which is generating knowledge, the knowledge base, which is providing platforms for integration, to look for to identify potentials for value chains or business models. So what I want to say at the end is we have to define very smart and transnational bioeconomy regions to really make full use of the transnational innovation systems. This is what I want to give into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian, also for keeping the time precisely. I now hand over to Dr. Stephanie Bröhring. Stephanie, please share your knowledge.
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to this panel. I would like to address a little bit the barriers and bringing results from existing studies we did in the domain of technology innovation management. Well, first of all, let me kick off my little speech here by introducing 4 different types of innovation in the bioeconomy, which we when we would like to see the larger transition, perhaps need to bear in mind, because all those different types of innovation come across with different challenges, which then have different implications for technology innovation management systems. So first of all, if we are talking about substitute products or substitution of existing bulk chemicals with raw materials, with renewables, that's perhaps just something where we have to focus on those challenges regarding the supply chain itself. Whereas if you are moving on and you are creating a new product, so new functionalities with bio-based materials, the whole story changes a bit and it becomes much more knowledge intense. And there you have obviously a huge demand of pulling together different interdisciplinary knowledge areas and crossing borders, not only in regional terms, but also in disciplinary terms. And that makes it highly complex. The next innovation type is looking at new processes of producing. So here we talk about biorefineries or entire new production systems based on synthetic biology being part of biorefinery systems. Here again, you find yourself in a setting where there's not yet an established international harmonized approach of defining specified qualities of these products. So there, again, you need a very good technology innovation system which helps you coming up with standardization and ensuring companies to have planning security along this. Lastly, I would like to talk about new behavior. That's also a new innovation relevant to, or innovation type relevant to the emerging bioeconomy. For companies, it's just doing new things. For instance, changing towards a more circular system, which then again creates new interfaces within the national boundaries, but also transnational, where the whole network character, of course, is getting more and more important. But also, this implies a new mental model. So the notion of a circular system obviously needs to be embedded not only on the overall system, but also in each individual managerial decision. So if we look at those four different types, it's quite true that the importance of technology innovation systems regionally, but also internationally becomes much more important. And to me, what I would like to discuss with you later on, I think one key, perhaps even the most important challenge for those overarching technology innovation systems to emerge is that we are often not only crossing regional borders or geographically different regions to integrate them, but we are also crossing science and technology or different disciplines. And if you would like to have people talking to each other, it's getting very difficult because there's different cognitive frames, and different disciplines don't always share a common language. So I think that's going to be something which is perhaps crucially to look at, because it adds another layer of complexity when it comes to integrating different actors to form a new technology innovation system. So any action which helps us overcoming not only national borders, but also disciplinary borders, I think is getting a very crucial and a very important aspect. So how can we overcome this and foster interdisciplinary research is something I would like to kick off this session with. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie. A really important point, like not like to keep in mind, not only crossing national borders, but also disciplinary borders. Very important point, I guess. But I yield now the floor to our last speaker, Dr. Elspeth McRae. Please, Elspeth, kindly share your knowledge with us. I see that maybe Elspeth is no longer with us. Interesting. Well, whether I have a look, whether Elspeth McRae did have problems joining our session, I would like now to yield the floor to my colleague, Dr. Sasha Stark, who will facilitate a discussion based on what the speakers told us. So please, Sasha, I yield the floor to you, and I'll have a look where Elspeth is. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you all for the very interesting talks. I think it all was quite complementary to each other. And while we're waiting for the chat to be filled with questions to you as the experts here in our room, I would like to go first with catching up with what Stephanie said in her last takeaway regarding the challenge that we need to foster interdisciplinary borders in order to build a sustainable bioeconomy. And I would like to address the following question now to Christian, who's more on the practical involved in the practical implementation of regional bioeconomies in Western Germany. So Christian, considering what Stephanie just mentioned, that it's very important to foster interdisciplinary exchange between actors. I mean, we all know, coming from different disciplines, be it being economists or political scientists or natural scientists, we all have some issues, and once we get to try to talk to politicians, then it gets even more complicated. So Christian, maybe you can share some insights how you deal with that in the Bioeconomie Revier in North Rhine-Westphalia. Thank you.
Yeah, on the science level, we have got a good example. It's the Bioeconomy Science Center, which is a competence hub for bioeconomy research, and it integrates not all, but the most important universities, and also the Forschungszentrum, the research center Jülich. And within the Bioeconomy Science Center, there are funding schemes. And the criteria to take part in these funding schemes is that different researchers from different scientific background, for example, biotechnologists have to work closely together with not only engineers, but also with economists. So this is a prerequisite to take part in the funding program. So we try to promote the transdisciplinary research by these funding schemes. And on a political level, the structural change in the Rheinisches Revier in the Rhineland is a very political process. So we've got a lot of publicity, and we are systematically talk to all communities of the Rhineland, of the region, and inform them about bioeconomy, and try to set up platforms on a community base. So these are different platforms where communities can meet with scientists, with farmers, with corporates. So we are trying to build a really ambitious and differentiated instrument set, where we can try to foster the integration of the whole region.
Thank you very much, Christian. And I see that we have a question in the chat by Sophia Dieken. This is towards Stephanie. But it basically matches what I just asked Christian. So I'd just like to throw back the ball in your ballpark, Stephanie, as the question by Sophia is, and maybe you can also get back to what Christian just elaborated. So Sophia asks, how could a common language for transdisciplinary innovation look like, and how can we develop one? I believe that Christian made a pretty prime example, but maybe you can share your expertise on how to actually develop and a common language and how it could look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for this question. Yeah, how should I answer this? I am aware of one EU project which actually tried to translate how food technologists and biotechnologists talk about new food development. So there was developed an ontology to pull together people to understand or have a same approach, a same glossary of what they actually mean when I talk about science. Perhaps that is one way to do it. I would say it needs to, as anything, needs to you need to pull people from different disciplines together by joining them in a joint vision, because then you're no longer talking about your own scientific boundaries, but you have something like a common goal where you seek to develop or where you seek to push boundaries. One example here could be the Synthetic Biology Center at the University in Düsseldorf. And it starts out already with education at university level. So instead of having different silos of educating a biotechnologist or a microbiologist or a food scientist, it's much better to have cross-disciplinary projects or MSc studies, as we today already see also in Düsseldorf. I think that's a great example to join and reach out already at students level to integrate and then pull together the different expertise levels to form a common vision and then reach towards new technology innovation systems. One other remark, I mean, if you look at us as professors or scientists, we always are incentivized by publishing in peer-reviewed journals, and those are pretty much bounded to our own discipline. And maybe that's something where politicians could, or I don't know, our Ministry of Education or whoever could perhaps change that into that very specified or that incentive system, which does not foster interdisciplinary research. Okay, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. As well, we all see in the scientific discourse, and when it comes to project announcements, that interdisciplinarity is very high on the current agenda. So I am fully convinced that this is an important point, but I also have the feeling that in some cases this interdisciplinarity is just on the paper and not to the best extent really lived. But as you just mentioned, education, you pretty much paved the ground now for our next question that has been stated by Janine Macht. She asks, what about the general public? And we know that bioeconomy is pretty high on the agenda and on the scientific discourse, but when you roam around the streets, you don't really have the feeling that people know what bioeconomy is, even though we have the scientific year in Germany for bioeconomy, for instance, but it hasn't really come to the general understanding what is behind it, and that there is actually a bioeconomy strategy for several years now within Germany, within the European Union. And Janine Macht states the question to Christian, and I also like to address this question to all the speakers here. Does the general public really take part in the bioeconomy discussion, or is it rather science and industry? And this actually goes into the direction how important education is when it comes to bioeconomy and transnational innovations in general.
In the last months we have set up a set of instruments to talk with the general public. We have also set up a participation process and all the instruments which are necessary for this. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we are not really get in touch in this as we wanted to in the last month. So we are restricted to a lot of exchange with, for example, communities, with mayors, with local politicians, with supporters of SMEs in the community. So, and there, if you inform them, if you explain what bioeconomy is, what the principles behind are, what contribution to sustainable economy or green economy, bioeconomy can provide, then there is a great interest. And at the moment we are in a situation that the communities and the I don't know the English word for Landkreise, for local regions, they are asking for input for their economic strategies. They want to diversify their structure, their economic structure, and they see potential, the potential of bioeconomy to do so. So we are facing a lot of interest, but we have to inform the people, we have to explain it, we have to be patient, because the usual citizen does not know bioeconomy at all. Yeah, but then if it is explained and it is understood, then we are facing a lot of interest and of cooperation willingness.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to address the last question to Franz and Stine. Also goes into the direction of education, but more importantly, the new geography of innovation, as we got a next question by Sophia, and this will be the last question that I'd like to have it answered by you very quickly, because before I have to hand over back to Stefan. So Sophia asked regarding the new geography of innovation, such as new forms of networks. Can this also help with regional cooperation, especially between regions in different countries and maybe even continents? So first, Franz and Stine, go ahead, and okay. then we have Franz for the close.
I leave my answer to Stine. I think she's the expert here.
Well, I'm not so sure about that, but I think it links very much to the discussion that's already taking place here. That this regional specialization that has emerged in the clusters of different industries, and now with the new call for interdisciplinary collaboration, it calls for a more interregional collaboration to take the regions and the clusters as a springboard into new forms of innovation. I mean, in Denmark here we see the wind turbine industry really in need to learn a lot more about other technologies than the turbines themselves. And I think it also calls for a whole new system of whole new educational programs that we are to develop these orchestrators. I don't think we should scale down the education of specialists, but we also need these orchestrators who can facilitate and build bridges between the disciplines, but also across cultures. And it's basically things that we are not able to do ourselves. So it's a huge challenge, I think.
Okay, thank you very much for this nice discussion, and also for the questions that have been stated in the chat. I'd like to hand back to Stefan. Stefan, the mic is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Sasha, for moderating the discussion, and a big thank you to all the speakers and experts who shared their expertise with us. Compared to Monday, we really had a discussion, and there were less technical problems. So I really want to thank you to making time to discuss transnational innovation with us. As a next step, here in the chat, are now the new breakout rooms where you can participate in regional sessions, either in Africa or in Asia, or you can stay with us in the EU OECD, where my colleague, Dr. Sandra Wenghaus, will chair the session, and Dr. Stark will then again moderate. So thank you very much again for your contributions, and hopefully see you in 1 or 2 minutes in the EU OECD session. So thank you, and have a good morning. Bye-bye.
Sandra?
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so thank you again for joining our session on the European Union and the EU, the OECD countries and Oceania. My name is Sandra Wenghaus. I will be chairing this session for you, which I again co-organized with my colleagues Stefan Bösner from the Stockholm Environment Institute and Sascha Stark from the Center for Development Research at the University of Bonn. So I think we're many of the same people, but for anyone who joined, again, please keep your cameras off and microphones muted, although we have much fewer issues with Zoom, so that's good. Similar to the setup of the previous session, we again will have 3 inspirational speakers in this session. And we have a set of guiding questions, if we can see those in the slides. So the 3 guiding questions are: which regional visions of future bioeconomy transformation pathways exist? How can regional cooperation promote a successful transformation towards a sustainable bioeconomy? And what are the key drivers and contextual mediators and barriers affecting the sustainable regionalization of bioeconomies? And I will briefly introduce the speakers, which again are Elspeth McRae, who is currently the Chief Innovation and Science Officer at Zion, a Crown Research Institute in New Zealand, where she, for example, also led the definition of the Institute's recent 2030 strategy to reshape the transitioning of New Zealand to a circular bioeconomy. And she's also on the management team for the National Science Challenge in Science and Technology for Industry, focusing on materials, design and manufacturing. And she's also on the International Advisory Committee for the Global Bioeconomy Summit. Then we have Christian Klaar, who is head of the coordination office of the Bioeconomie Revier project, located at the Forschungszentrum in Jülich, where they address the structural change process in the Rheinische Revier towards a model region for a sustainable bioeconomy in a former and current lignite mining region. And as a third speaker, we have Stefanie Bröhring, who is full professor of technology and innovation management and entrepreneurship at the Faculty of Agriculture at the University of Bonn. And her main focus is on interdisciplinary research and technology-based startups to foster sustainability as well as digital transitions. And I would like to hand over to Elspeth. Are you here?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. Great. The floor is yours.
Okay, do you want my video or do you want to keep it off?
You can try to turn it on. I think in Zoom it has worked fine.
It's on, and you can see a volcano erupting behind me, if you can see that well.
Yeah, very nice. We can see and hear you well.
Okay, very good. So it's a pleasure to be able to talk about the Oceania, and I've just been in one of the other meetings, and really the sort of things that I think are happening is a real shift in manufacturing and using biomass. In particular, there's distributed manufacturing, and that means you can do localized manufacturing. You don't transport all of your biomass to some centralized place, but because of technology, we're heading into much more localized situations, which means each place can be a little bit more unique. You have a lot of free trade agreements. So New Zealand has just signed this week the ASEAN Australia-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. There's also free trade agreements with Australia specifically, and Singapore and Malaysia and Thailand, and the trumped out Pacific one as well. So all of these vehicles are there, but I'm not sure how well they are used for the bioeconomy. One of the ways that we in New Zealand are looking at how we can collaborate with people is we actually do joint experiments. And so we do work where we take our biomass and go and work in someone else's laboratories or scale up facilities. And we have some people who come to us, but one of the really big impediments is a lot of the border problems and the border restrictions. So you've got a whole lot of policies that have been built up, but they don't think about collaboration between regions and between places. And then with Indigenous knowledge, people often think there's a lot of Indigenous knowledge, but when you look at the Oceania region, it varies because, for example, there wasn't any viruses. There wasn't, within the Pacific nations, they didn't have measles. New Zealanders didn't have many of these diseases that have been around in most of the rest of the world. So they didn't have Indigenous knowledge on how to deal with it, but they had other Indigenous knowledge, such as cuts and digestion and various other things using local materials. So a lot of resources to think about, and to think about differently is, I think, what's coming. That's enough from me.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. I very much look forward to discussing about this more after we hear our other two speakers. So Christian, can you unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah, hello everybody. And yeah, I would like to use the opportunity to introduce our, I will call it, bioeconomy transformation ecosystem, which we are setting up at the moment here in the western part of Germany, in the Rhineland, where structural change is now ongoing, and where the bioeconomy is one of the hot topics to replace lignite mining industry and income and jobs. So we set up, I will introduce 5 key components which complement an already excellent innovation and bioeconomy landscape which is in place in the Rhineland. But let me focus on 5 components. So the Bioeconomy Science Center is a research hub which integrates regional research institutions and provides provides options for transdisciplinary bioeconomy research. And in this system, its aim is to continuously generate bio-innovations and also provide education for young people. Secondly, we have got the so-called innovation labs, which complement the excellent innovation landscape and which are meant as interface of scientists, of SME, of farmers, and which grant access to competences, to technologies, to research infrastructures, for example, field labs or demo biorefineries. So these innovation labs are the place where the people come together on a scientific or of a corporate demand. The BioBooster is an accelerator program for the bioeconomy. It's a thematic accelerator, which is systematically looking for innovation demand of SME. And if there is a demand identified, then there will be a process to look for or to identify technologies, innovations which are in the region, in the academic landscape, which fit to the demand of the SME. And if there is a match, then it is a base for a transfer for a startup generation. Then it will be looked for how far this technology or solution can match the demand, and then the aim is to generate startups based on these demand, on this match. And we have got the coordination office, which is coordinating the whole process, or tries to coordinate the whole process to ensure a synergistical transition. And it provides a knowledge base for the whole region. It provides, it does screenings and potential analysis of the region and makes it available for the stakeholders and actors in the region, and also is responsible for the knowledge transfer into the society and regional actors and institutions. And last but not least, we've got a competence platform, which is doing systems analysis and which is scientifically evaluating the whole process. So we can evaluate the process itself, and then if there are good or bad, or based on knowledge, we can adjust the transformation process itself. So these 5 key components are in place and are getting to work now, are getting together now, and we hope that this will be successful. And we've got started yet, and hopefully I can report in the next Global Bioeconomy Summit about our progress. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, perfect, Christian. Thank you also to you. Before I hand over to Stephanie Bröhring, I would just like to remind everyone to please use the chat for questions. You can already post the questions now, because after this talk, we'll go into the discussion. So please use the chat to post any questions you have. And Steffi, now I would like to hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, there's no volcano behind me. I really like the picture of Elsbeth. This is actually the University of Bonn. Yeah, no, we are all getting much more experienced with using all the different functionalities. So even our uni has now this great picture to demonstrate where we are. Well, not really. Huh? Okay, what do I have here to kick off the discussion? I thought I present you some insights from a recent study, which is also now published, same as the bioeconomy innovation types I just mentioned previously. This study looks at the emergence of novel value chains in the bioeconomy, because I chose this because it has a regional component, and it shows and demonstrates perhaps quite nicely the different challenges we still have for those regional innovation systems to kick off. So the idea is here that we would like to recover phosphate from plant or from bio-based waste streams. So if you are producing oil, rapeseed oil, you have the press cake, and that press cake is rich in phosphate. So the idea is, it's actually driven by biotechnologists. The idea is to have a very efficient enzyme, phytase, which can extract phosphate out of those side streams from food production. In theory, this is actually a very clever thing. You extract the phosphate, then you don't have to mine this from Mexico or other regions. So this would be a very sustainable resource. However, the problem for why we don't see this at the market yet is that there are a couple of challenges, which are perhaps a nice example also for other projects where people or researchers try to valorize side streams. First of all, the problem is that it's yet not cost efficient. Why? Because the current system still is just too efficient. The existing value chain of the, let's say, unsustainable resource has economies of scale. It's very profitable. Hidden costs are not yet put into the pricing. So there are a lot of external negative externalities which aren't reflected by the price. So the existing process is very efficient. The new process isn't. The missing industry standard for the bio-based resource is missing. So people don't really know what is it we have to meet. So what is our regulatory frame here? And perhaps the most important challenge is that the different actors, the food company, has by no means any connections to the biotechnologists, nor has it access to the phosphate market, because their end market is food production. So it's very difficult for them to build up a new supply chain, which is then targeting ingredients, in this case, phosphate. So there's a huge gap between the different players. They are yet not really connected. We tried to connect them in our research project, but still people in the food industry are driven by operational efficiency. So investing into this ingredient business is perhaps not really in their strategic plan. Plus, people working in the company reported to us that they are focusing on what they're doing so far. So there's somehow a lock-in situation. It's very difficult to break the existing path. Plus, there is a different location between, where the resources occur and where the technology is. So technology and resources are not necessarily falling within the same regional domain. So that needs to be overcome. And then last but not least, the so-called absorptive capacity, as we call it in management terms. So the ability to realize that there is value within a side stream, or that there is value in a different knowledge domain, makes it very problematic for companies to identify, absorb, and also then assimilate those information and to put it into new commercial means. So it's difficult for the company to actually, the food company in this sense, to actually understand, hey, there is something in the side stream we could perhaps use, and therefore they don't really kick off this new process. Last but not least, if we look at the larger community, right now there is not really a green premium price or any incentive for the markets to adopt this purely plant-based phosphate, and that's very difficult for then downstream companies to generate any price premium here. So to put together those challenges, I think there are a lot of organizational challenges we need to be aware of, plus market challenges, as well as institutional and regulatory challenges for those regional innovation systems to emerge. And yeah, with this, perhaps I don't want to sound too negative, but a couple of things need to change before those bio-based circular value chains are really kicking off and then replacing the existing very cost-efficient economies of scale driven model. Okay, thank you very much. That was my input.
Okay, thank you very much, Steffi, and thanks to all of you for these great introductory speeches. I have lots of questions that I could and would like to ask, but for this, I'll actually hand over to Sascha Stark, who will moderate the discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you very much, Elspeth, Christian, and Stephanie for the very interesting talks. We have, in fact, so just a quick comment, please feel free, and this goes to the audience here, please feel free to state your questions to the experts in the chat. We have a couple of questions already rolling in, but first off, a quick comment to Stephanie. You are asked whether to please provide a link to more information about your study. You can just post it in the chat as well. And there was a comment to you, Stephanie, from Elspeth, that you can also recover phosphate from human waste streams. I'm not sure whether you, Elspeth, want to go into more detail regarding this comment.
Yeah. I can, but I actually can give an answer to Stephanie from experience in Europe. So in terms of the challenges that we have had an experience of commercializing in Europe a bio-based material in a centralized system. But I'll go back to the phosphate and human waste streams, all right? It's just one way to redesign the whole infrastructure about our wastewaters and waste systems from our homes, which have all been designed to be centralized. And if you look at the Bill Gates reinvent the toilet system, that's part of where we can go. And that was designed for the developing world. It has a series of targets, and it's got to be cheap, and it's got to be single household, and it has to have a certain usage rate. And you can reuse all of the materials. So you get your water back, you get the fertilizers, so it's phosphate, and so on, and you could actually reuse the material to actually then manufacture onwards. So there's a whole area of science there. I won't go any further into it, but if you want to look at the Reinvent the Toilet Challenge from Bill Gates Foundation, you probably find most of the information there, at least some majority of it anyway. If I don't want to dominate, but we've had an experience where we designed a wood fiber composite, plastic composite for substitution for short glass fiber in the automotive industry. And we developed it back in the late 2000s, patented, commercialized. Now they've really, and then there was one company after the GFC that said, I need to change my business. And it was a wood processing company. And they said, I need to change my business. I want to take my fiber into automotive, without realizing it's a completely different value chain. They've never talked to any of them. They all behave differently. They have a standardized system, as absolutely you said, Stephanie. And we went on a journey with them and learning about how to get material all the way through to automotive approval. All right, and it is approved in Europe. I can tell you most of the automotive companies have approved it, but the process was talking to a whole lot of people who didn't want to know anything any different. And we ended up with this company going through a learning process because they were learning. They'd never worked with plastics processes before, for example, or automotive. And we went through a process of sorting out, you had to find the lead companies, the lead innovators, the ones who took risks, and there weren't very many of them. Then you had to identify who were the fast followers. And then you had to say, well, who were the ones who would just come along when everyone else had sorted it out, which is actually generally the big players. So it's really, really hard, and I absolutely understand your comments.
Thank you very much. I was, you do not dominate at all, and I was actually just about to ask you to share your insights on your experience with commercializing bio-based materials in the EU. So thank you very much for that. That was actually just a point that I wanted to move towards to Stephanie, and also Elspeth and Christian as well. Stephanie, you said that how did you put it, that the price premium for green products is not yet given, and this is something that inhibits the establishment of new and green products in the market, as far as I understood that correctly. And what I'd like to ask here now is the question, before I bring in a question from the chat. What do you think is the role of policy? I mean, it's obvious that at least in the European Union and in Germany in particular, we have a bioeconomy strategy, and it's based on political incentives to establish a sustainable bioeconomy. Do you believe that your example, Stephanie, that you just brought up from your study, is it necessary to have political incentives such as taxing the too efficient products, not clean products, but too efficient, as you stated? Are you do you think that we need some policy measures to change the direction here? And that's basically it. Yes, that's my question that I wanted to bring in.
Yeah, well, generally, I'm a big fan of, let's say, a free-floating market. But what do we see here? We see here the classical infant industry argument, where a new industry is just forming and seeking to get established. So obviously, yes, we do need a policy framework which is favoring more sustainable options. Because we have a situation of market failure in the sense that people are not willing to pay that price premium, or on the other hand, producers are not charged for the negative externalities. So I think that gives arguments for very carefully designing a policy framework which is fostering the circular economy in this sense. So yes, I think that's needed. But again, it needs to be very carefully designed. Otherwise, you also end up in, as we see now in Germany, by incentivizing the use of biogas. At least the area where I'm from, you only see now corn, and it has negative side effects, obviously. So that needs to be taken into consideration, of course, as well.
Yeah, that is a good point that you just raised with the monoculture and the cornfields that you see everywhere, and it's hard to keep the general public motivated, especially once you come up with new taxes. And this is currently the situation that you see with this whole COVID-19 pandemic and the discussion how the general public feels about that and further restrictions. Elspeth, let me forward the question to you, that how about the political incentives and carefully designed policy frameworks, as Stephanie said. As far as I know, in Oceania, there's no current bioeconomy strategy. How would you feel about policy incentives here?
So I just did a little comment, a follow-up comment relating to the discussion on our natural fiber-based plastics for automotive, but depends on what you define as Oceania. So Oceania is really Australia, New Zealand, the Pacific Islands, and Papua New Guinea. And the Pacific Islands are French, and they're American, and they're independent, and they're various other people's sort of overall arching control. But then you actually start looking at Japan and China and all the rest of it as well. And Japan, Malaysia, Thailand, they all have bioeconomy strategies. Parts of Australia has a bioeconomy strategy. We're really crossing our fingers for New Zealand at the moment. But other than that, one of the arguments we've been making to the government is that, as in the USDA Bio-Preferred program, the government is a major market. So if the government says the priority is to buy bio-based and not the cheapest, all right, so normally they go off and buy the cheapest for everything because it's all about cost efficiencies. But if they had a policy that said buy bio-based first if it's available, then you start to make a market, and then people will take more risks in manufacturing. So I'd be interested to hear what other people think about that.
Stephanie and Christian, do you want to come in on that remark by Elspeth?
No addition from my side.
Well, I can just only confirm it. That's obviously, it's great to create first demand by having the government being the first customer, if you want. However, I think next to this, creating awareness for bio-based products and creating also, awareness for the downside of the unsustainable products is perhaps also a very important lever or a very important action to do. Because at the moment we don't see any benefit from bio-based products because we don't see the risks. The risk of an unsustainable behaviors only you see hitting our future generations. So perhaps governmental action also needs to go beyond this and creating a risk perception, which then, the downside or the upside of this then would be a benefit perception of a more sustainable lifestyle and creating through this a bigger awareness and perhaps then also a higher willingness to pay for more sustainable products. So I also see a role of the government in here.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question by Stefan towards Christian. So we've heard that in the previous rounds on transnational innovation systems, for instance, and also on our Monday session, we've heard that local cultural specificities are important and might be fostering, but also can be a barrier of cooperation, be it regional or even transnational. From the German experience in the Rhineland and the German experience with the coal phase out, vis-a-vis the Polish decision to foster coal as a fuel, can the German experience in the Rhineland of how to get off coal be somehow replicable in Poland, for instance, or is there transnational cooperation between German and Polish coal regions to develop phase-out strategies?
I think they are talking, but there's no common strategy. From our perspective, we are in a very initial phase of the transformation process, and we had first to convince the regional stakeholders of the benefits which bioeconomy can contribute. to the structural change process. And now I think we were successful, and now bioeconomy is a big part of the regional structure and economy program. And we are now setting up a bridge to another German coal region, which is facing the same challenge. So they are also phasing out due to the energy transition in Germany. And then if we have established this, and if we are more established also in our own region, then we will try to also get in contact with other coal regions or similar regions in Europe, and try to design mechanisms how knowledge transfer can be organized. But at the moment we are focusing on regional and intra-German cooperation, and the next step would be to transfer it to European regions. Try to transfer and get in touch and discussion.
Thank you very much. And talking about European policy developments, or general EU developments, but EU policy developments in particular, for instance, the Green Deal. How well do you believe that the current EU policy developments are coherent and serve to move forward the implementation of a sustainable bioeconomy or regional bioeconomy clusters? That goes first to Christian, and then maybe Stephanie and Elspeth as expert and head of the Advisory Council may come in.
I know that there, for example, in the Green Deal, in the Horizon 2020 Green Deal part, there are topics which address the transfer of bioeconomy or circular economy concepts between regions within Europe. So there are options to establish those corporations, and there are a lot of different strategies. This is also always so in the EU, that there are different strategies, and cohesion is is required and wanted. But I don't know. There are options to establish these, and there are also instruments which the EU wants to set up, which will promote this cooperation between EU regions. But I think it's at the beginning at the moment.
Thank you. Stephanie, what is your feeling regarding the EU policy developments vis-a-vis the sustainable bioeconomy implementation, or the implementation of regional bioeconomy clusters?
Well, in general, I'm of course very much in favor of the Green Deal and pulling this towards, the European level and putting a lot of effort behind. It's difficult for me to say that what's the effect on the regional bioeconomy system at this stage. However, if you look at the new funding schemes and the other instruments which are going to be put into place, I'm quite optimistic that this is obviously helping to push this forward. I also would like to draw the attention on the ESG, so the criteria of financial investors who are more and more asking companies to adhere to those criteria, and set also forward a strategy to implement the SDGs. So I think as soon as there's pressure, and if this pressure comes from financial institutions, then companies are much more motivated to change, because it may affect their share price, it may affect access to capital, and so on. And this is all, for me, together a great achievement. And I hope that the Green Deal will even more also reflect on this, and perhaps pull together these different mechanisms of funding. Also the funds we know all have to to overcome the pandemic, these need to be connected to sustainable goals, and that would be very beneficial if that happens. We don't see that often, and you don't see that in any short-term action. As in Germany, we discuss a lot the case of the Lufthansa. Why do they just get the funds and there's no mandatory sustainability goal connected to those funds? But I think overall, what's happening there, we will see an effect over the long term. So I'm optimistic.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I would really like to hear a final remark by Elspeth, as I'm quite sure that she has a very interesting. We could talk all day, but unfortunately the time proceeds, and I have to hand over to Sandra, even though this room might stay open to continue our discussion. Elspeth, do you want to have a closing remark before I give over?
I am very envious of the EU, have been for years and years and years. I think you've been very leading, very forward-looking. I think it's fantastic, and you might not realize you have achieved a lot. All right, you've achieved a huge amount in the bioeconomy. I am very optimistic. I think it is change. I think COVID's actually emphasizing and accelerating the change. I think a lot of people are looking at how fragile their value chains are and looking at, well, what can I do locally, and can I do something differently, and is there another way to do it, which goes back to regional thinking. I think it's all go. I'm really positive. So yes.
That's great to have positivity in these somewhat difficult times. So thank you very much for that. And I'd like to hand back over to Sandra for closing the session. But as I said, I believe we might leave the room open. You, Sandra, stated yourself that you have a lot of questions, and if not now, when then? But please, Sandra, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for handing it back to me. I'm very glad that today's meetings went well better than they did on Monday with all the technical problems we had. And thanks a lot. It's actually very good to be reminded of all the advancements and achievements that we've had in Europe, because I think being located here, it's much easier to see all the difficulties than actually realizing how much advancement has happened, although we certainly do see that. I would like to briefly hand over to Stefan, who would do a brief summary of our two sessions that we've had today. So Stefan, the microphone is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you very much again to all the participants. I think, as you rightly point out, this session was much more conducive to discussions because we had no technical problems. I found the discussions really inspiring, and I've learned a lot. Also, we connected with different people from different backgrounds. New geographies of innovations are emerging, new networks of innovators are emerging, new types of innovation are emerging. Like from the first session, I really found Stephanie's remarks about that it's often not only the case that innovation systems have crossed borders, but also that disciplines, sciences have to cross their silos, so to speak, in order to collaborate not only transnationally, but also transdisciplinary. And I think it's a really important point, because we see that in many EU projects, for instance, there is the modeling team who does climate modeling, and they don't know how to speak to the social scientists and vice versa. So I think this was a really brilliant remark, and should remind us that innovation is not only technological, but also behavior and transdisciplinary, as Stephanie pointed out. I think really fascinating stuff coming out from Germany, how the Rhineland is trying to wane itself off coal, and what kind of actor networks and clusters they are developing. So that was interesting. And then, of course, in the EU session, and I really want to thank Elspeth as well for this positive outlook. I think the EU gets so much heat and is so bashed every time, like by everybody, basically, so that we should also be optimistic and see what good has come out of regional cooperation. I mean, Time magazine once called the European Union the most prosperous joint venture on the planet, which I think is something to keep in mind as well. But I also would like to say that there is progress, and we should stay optimistic, but we have our work cut out. All the stakeholders. In this session, we learned that like business plan and getting the price right is quite difficult. Tapping into value streams can be challenging for companies. There we had notions of an orchestra who brings together all the different kind of streams to foster a strong innovation system, which gets the price right and which taps into value streams. We've also seen the importance of policy and how policy sometimes can do good, but how policy can do bad sometimes as well. So it's also really good to get the policies right, so to speak. And yeah, before I hand over to Sandra to really close this session, thank you very much for the fruitful discussions, and back to you, Sandra.
Great. Thank you very much, Stefan, for the summary of what we've learned in the past 2 days of workshops. Just as some final remarks, there will be a video conclusion of the workshops made available at the GBS platform towards the end of the week. So there'll be a video of how what we learned in the sessions and how the discussions went. And we also plan to make a post-workshop report available in the follow-up of the summit. So yeah, and I very much hope that that we stay in touch and that we can continue to work together on this topic. So as I mentioned, we will leave the room open for a little bit. So whoever is available and has questions, the room will be open, but we would formally conclude the workshop now. So thank you again for all the speakers, my co-organizers, and also all the participants for, I think, a great workshop, given that it had to be virtual. So thank you all very much.
Thanks, Sandra. Great job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you also from my side, Sandra, and all the others. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.